Okay, so today the first thing we're going to be doing is reviewing distance formula and finding the midpoint of a segment. That goes back to geometry. The distance formula is based on the Pythagorean theorem, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared, right? So if the a squared and the b squared are the two sides of my right triangle, so this side of my right triangle is just how much the x changed. So delta x, that's the little triangle is a delta in Greek. And then the vertical rise is how much the y changed, or the vertical side is how much the y changed. So if I square those and take the square root, then I'll have what d is. So the distance is just going to be the square root of the change in x squared plus the change in y squared. So if I want to find the distance between -3, 5 and 4, -1, I look at how much my x changed. So what did my x change when I went from -3 to a +4? It changed by 7, right? So I take 7 squared. And then I look at from 5 to -1, how much did the y change?
6.
It changed by 6. I don't care that it's -6 because I'm squaring it. And I'm essentially talking about the length of a side of a triangle. So you don't really have to worry about your negatives. You just find out how much the x changed, how much the y changed, and you square them. So 7 squared is 49, 6 squared is 36, and you add those together, and you get 85. And 85 doesn't have a perfect square that goes into it, so that's as far as you can go. And your answer is the square root of 85. So here's one for you guys to try on your whiteboard. Okay, it looks like most of you guys are getting there. You end up with 4 squared plus 8 squared. It's the square root of 80. That's 16 times 5. So when you simplify it, it's 4 root 5. All right, next thing we'll talk about is the midpoint formula. So when you're finding the midpoint, you're just averaging your x's and averaging your y's, or finding the middle of the x and the middle of the y's. So how do you average two numbers?
You add them and divide by.
You add them, and if there's only two of them, you divide by 2. So you're just going to take your x coordinates, add them together, divide by 2. Take your y coordinates, add them together, divide by 2. So if I want to find the midpoint of the line segment that's joining -5, 1 and -1, 6, I'm going to add my x's. So -5 plus -1, divide that by 2. And I'm going to add my y's, 1 plus 6, and divide it by 2. So -5 and -1 becomes -6 over 2 and 7 over 2. And so simplifying all the way, I get -3, 3.5. And that would be the midpoint of the segment that joins those 2 points. So on your whiteboards, here's one for you guys to do. All right, looks like you guys were getting that fine. 1, -3 would be the midpoint of that segment. All right, so now we're going to start talking about some parabolas. We're going to talk about the focus, directrix, and vertex of a parabola. So we've done parabolas before, but we never really talked about where they came from. What is a parabola? What's the definition? And what a parabola is it's the points that are equidistant from a point called the focus and a line called the directrix. And your vertex is halfway between the focus and the directrix, and the directrix is perpendicular to the axis of symmetry. So I have an axis of symmetry for my, helps if it's straight, sort of straight there. That's not very straight either. Let me try and draw a straight axis of symmetry here. There we go, that's a little better. Okay, your axis of symmetry is perpendicular to the directrix. And if I've got a focus here, that means my vertex is going to be halfway between it. Right here. And then this was the directrix down here. And the axis of symmetry. So a parabola is all the points that are equidistant from those 2 points. So if I have my parabola, if I draw a segment from the focus to the side of the parabola, and then from the parabola down to my directrix, they are the same distance apart. And those are the same distance apart. I can pick any point on that parabola, and if it's drawn accurately, they will be, the segments will be the same length. Doesn't matter where I go on that parabola, it's equidistant. Okay? So that's where a parabola comes from. And so we're going to have a new standard equation that involves the focus and the directrix so that we can find them and graph them. So with the standard equation, we're going to be using the vertex at 0, 0. We're not going to worry about translating graphs at all today, but we will probably tomorrow. So we can actually have vertical or horizontal parabolas. If it is a vertical parabola, those are the kinds you guys are used to seeing. That's when we have an x squared. And so if it's x squared equals 4py, and if it's horizontal, that means I have a y squared. And y squared equals 4px. So the p will tell you how far and what direction the focus is. If p is greater than 0, then that means that my vertical parabolas are going upwards. And if p is less than 0, then my parabola is pointing down. For the horizontal parabolas, if p is positive, I'm going in the positive x direction, so it's going to the right. But if it's negative, it's going in the negative x direction or to the left. So p gives you the distance and the direction that you're going to get to the focus. And the focus is always inside the parabola. Okay, so if we have a vertical parabola, and suppose my focus is right here, then the focus is at the point 0, p. And the directrix is the line y equals negative p. So the directrix is always in the opposite direction as the focus. And then my axis of symmetry is the line x equals 0. If it's a horizontal one, now my focus is at the point p, 0. And the directrix is x equals negative p. And my axis of symmetry is y equals 0. All right, so let's graph one of them. We've got y squared equals 20x. We're going to identify the focus, directrix, and axis of symmetry. So the first thing I want to know, though, before I can figure anything out, is this one going to be vertical or horizontal? I'm hearing more votes for horizontal. Somebody want to tell me why they picked horizontal? Because of the y squared, yeah. So we know it's horizontal, and the general equation is y squared equals 4px. Well, what we have is y squared equals 20x. And so what does 4p have to equal? P has to equal 5, because 4p is 20, right? So yeah, p is 5. So that helps us find the focus. So p is positive, so we're going to the right in that direction. My focus is at 5, 0. And my directrix will be x equals -5. And then my axis of symmetry is y equals 0. And that will be along the x-axis here. So now the problem is I don't have any points, and I'm not sure how wide or how narrow it's going to be. So I do need to make a table. And it's kind of not in it's not in the form we're used to writing tables from. We've got y squared equal to 20x. And normally when we make a table, we just have y equals, right? So if I want to be able to make a table, I just take the square root of both sides. And so y is going to be plus or minus the square root of 20x. And I can make a table from that. And I'm just going to pick really easy numbers like 0 and 5. Plug in a 0, it's going to be 0, and that's where our vertex is. If I plug in a 5, 5 times 20 is 100. So why do you suppose I picked 5?
Because 100 is a perfect square.
Because 100 is a perfect square, exactly. So it's going to be plus or minus 10, the square root of 100. So I go to 5 positive 10 and 5 negative 10. And then my vertex, and I draw the arc through those points. And there's your parabola. Alrighty, so on your whiteboards, I'm going to have you guys graph this one. Before you graph it, though, go ahead and show me what you think P is and what the focus, directrix, and axis of symmetry is. Also, whether it's vertical or horizontal, too. All right, so P is -2 because of that -8, right? And so my focus, well, first of all, was this vertical or horizontal?
Vertical.
This one's vertical. So going from 0, 0, I'm going to go down vertically by 2, right? So my focus is at 0, -2. And then that means my directrix is in the opposite direction, and it's y equals +2. And then your axis is going to be y equals 0. I mean, x equals 0. Yes?
How do you know, like, when your axis equals 0? Does it ever change?
So for these problems, if it's just in the standard 4px or 4py form, it's either going to be x equals 0 or y equals 0, depending on if it's horizontal or vertical. Tomorrow we'll do some translations, so then it's going to change based on the translations. But for today, it's going to always be either x equals 0 or y equals 0. Okay, so to make a table, What do we usually need to have alone? We want to have which one alone, the x or the y? We want the y alone, don't we? Isn't that how we usually make a table? So to get the y alone, I've got to divide both sides by -8, right? So that means that y is equal to -1/8 times x squared. And so you can make a table using that. So you can put in a 1, but that's not going to be a very pretty number. You can put in a 2. It's okay. But it's going to be easier if you put in like plus or minus 4 or positive and -8. Those will give you the easiest ones for points. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go on. So if you plug in the 0, you get 0. 4 squared is 16 times -1/8, you get -2. And you get the same thing when you put in the -4, because when you square it, it's still positive 16. And then 8 squared is 64, which divided by 8 takes us back to 8. So we get -8. And so when you plot the points, 0, 0, -4, -2, positive 4, -2, -8, -8, and -8, or positive 8, -8. You get those points, and there's your parabola. If you plug in y, then you're going to have to take the square root of it. So you could work the table backwards, but then you'd have to take the square root of it to get your x, because you'd just be getting x squared. So you can work it backwards if you want to, but it just makes it a little harder. Okay, I want you guys to do one more of these. Let's see if we can take a little less time on this one. Okay, so now we've got y squared equals -16x. So is this one horizontal or vertical? This one is horizontal. And is it going to be going left or right? It's going to be going to the left because of that negative, yeah. Okay? So figure out P, the focus, directrix, and so on. So what kind of numbers are we going to have to plug in for x for this one? Negative numbers, otherwise we can't take the square root of it. So if I put in 0, I'm going to get 0. And if I plug in -1, then it's either plus or minus 4. If I plug in -4, it's going to be plus or minus 8. So plotting those points. Yeah, my 8's not quite going to fit on here, but so that's what you guys end up with for your parabola. Okay. Questions? No? All right. Okay, they also might want you to work the other way around. They might give you a graph and ask for the equation. So since this one is vertical, I know it has to be x squared equals 4py, right? And I can't, they didn't give me the focus, but they did give me the directrix. And so it's y equals some number. What number would that be right there? What is each of the squares worth?
0.5.
Actually, each of the squares is worth a half. So yeah, you have to be real careful with that. So the equation of my directrix is y equals -1.5, right? Or 3/2. So if y equals -1.5 is my directrix, then that means that p is a positive 1.5. And so then you just plug it into the equation. So x squared is going to equal 4 times 1.5 times y. And so if you multiply 4 times 1.5, you get 6. And so x squared equals 6y would be the equation for that parabola. Alrighty, so here's one for you guys to do real quickly before the bell rings. I'll have you guys write the equation for this one. All right, which direction are we going to focus on this one? We're going in the negative direction, aren't we? So right there is my p, -3. And it's horizontal, so it's y squared equals 4px. Oops, that's not an x. So what's 4 times -3? -12. So it's y squared equals -12x. All right, questions on anything? No? All right.